Coming up on today's show, we've got updated Jaguars depth charts after the 2026 NFL Draft for every position. You're watching Jags Now, presented by our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. I'm your host, Cullen Brown, and without any further ado, let's just get right into it. Starting off with the quarterback depth chart, not a lot of surprises here in terms of kind of the overall order, if you will. Trevor Lawrence is going to be your quarterback one, barring something unforeseen happening. You got Nick Mullins as your backup, Carter Bradley, and then Joey Aguilar, who's more than likely going to be fighting for a practice squad spot, but maybe could give Carter Bradley a run for QB3. And I did want to just throw this note from Tom Pelissero out there, just in case this does happen. I don't know if Derek Robertson will ultimately be signed by the Jaguars or maybe just included into a camp battle, but he is set to try out for both the Titans and Jaguars rookie mini camps, but again, it's not official yet, so just wanted to make the personal note, but that's why he wasn't included on the actual depth chart itself. Moving into the running back position. Now, you've got no more Travis Etienne, but you've got Bashal Tutin, Chris Rodriguez, Quint Allen, and a bunch of other guys that are willing to kind of step up and contribute. And I want to talk about Chris Rodriguez here because a lot of Jags fans may not be familiar with who Chris Rodriguez is and what he could bring to this football team. Liam Coen at the NFL owners meeting spoke about Chris Rodriguez and what his kind of vision was for Rodriguez. He obviously played under Liam Coen when he was the offensive coordinator at Kentucky. He had this to say on Rodriguez. What I always appreciated about C-Rod has been his rushing yards over expected and his yards after contact. Those are the two areas you look at where you say, did you get more than what the play was blocked for? And did you make people miss? There are different ways to make people miss. How do you gain yards? There are a lot of different ways to skin the cat. Ultimately, for me and for the type of style of team want to be able to punch you in the mouth and get those hard yards. Getting a guy like Chris to complement that room, we're just trying to add good football players in there. And I think it's pretty obvious based on Cohen's quote there and just kind of the overall look at the room that Rodriguez will have a prominent role in 2026. I think Bashal Tutin is going to be the Jaguars' kind of RB1 that's going to get the bulk of carries, and I do expect him to have an increased workload. Chris Rodriguez will have, I'd say, at least 35 to 40% of the carries for Jacksonville, if not higher. So I think he's going to be a nice complement to Tutin, who's more of your kind of home run hitting, elusive back, whereas Chris Rodriguez is going to be more of your thumper in between the tackles, short yardage, maybe even get some goal line work as well. But I wanted to ask you guys this. If you had to guess the Jaguars' backfield split, I want you to get down below for me. Go through each of the Jaguars' three running backs, Bashal Tutin, Chris Rodriguez, and LaQuint Allen, and give me a percentage of snaps you think each one of these three guys are going to get in 2026. Let me know down in the comment section. Moving on to the wide receiver position, where obviously the main talking point is Parker Washington, Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr. Which one of these guys is going to be wide receiver one next season? You obviously got Travis Hunter on kind of more of a situational basis, whereas he's going to be focusing more on cornerback, but we'll get into that later. You obviously added some guys through the draft, but if I had to bet which wide receiver would kind of take the totem pole and take that kind of initial, hey, I'm going to be this team's lead guy that Trevor Lawrence trusts, I'm going to bet it's Parker Washington. And you see the stats on screen. Washington, that last 4 weeks of the season, had almost 50% of his production and really took off. 22 receptions, 400 yards, 18 yards per catch. To me, he is the guy that any one of those you could make the argument in terms of Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington. I just think he gives you something a little bit extra, and inevitably when he does get his contract extension, I think it's going to be with the mindset that he is this team's main target at the wideout position. We're getting into some of the other positions here in just a moment, but today's episode of Jags Now could not be possible without our wonderful friends at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. The playoffs are here for basketball, baseball is underway, and it's time to cash in with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 sports picks app and is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Prize Picks is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. And you guys could even follow me on the app if you want to fade or follow any of my picks at CullenBro21. And I've got kind of a two-player lineup for tonight's Hoops action that I can show you on screen. R.J. Barrett. I like the more on his points tonight. I think he's going to have a really good game against the Cavaliers. And LeBron James, we got a max discount. Got to make sure you always take advantage of these at Prize Picks. All you have to do is score 1 point, and you're halfway home. A $10 lineup to win $30. New user offer. Download the Prize Picks app today. with the link in the comments and description and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Take a quick water break here. Excuse me. All right, getting into the tight end position, where the Jaguars made numerous additions this offseason. Nate Borkenshire and Tanner Koziel during the NFL draft. I think those guys are going to actually jump Quinn Morris on the Jaguars tight end depth chart, who was, re-signed to a one-year deal, and I think the Jaguars do have a plan for him in 2026, but Hunter Long, Patrick Herbert, these other guys, I just don't see a world where they make this roster. Like, their kind of roles are diminished based on some of the moves that the Jaguars made, and I do expect the Jacksonville to keep 4 tight ends. And I think Nate Borkenshire, a lot of fans and a lot of, draft analysts out there, they're kind of necessarily not sure what his, overall impact, given the fact that he's a day 3 guy. He's mainly been a blocking tight end throughout his time at Texas A&M. However, I do think that Liam Coen and James Gladstone, whenever they were looking throughout this tight end kind of group, identified him as like, hey, we want to have a vision for this guy. We think he could help us win the next year. And I'm very curious to see how it gets done, but I think those 4 tight ends will be the ones that are kept by Jacksonville. Moving into the offensive line now, where I think your top 5, at least before the draft, are kind of set, but based on, recent comments made by both Coen and Gladstone, I think the interior of the offensive line, those 2 guard positions are both going to be up for grabs. I think Cole Van Lannon, Robert Hainsey, and Anton Harrison, those 3 are locks. But with the addition of Emmanuel Pregnon, who, I'll say it once, I'll say it again, was an absolute steal in the 3rd round by Jacksonville, and Wyatt Milam, who's now entering his 2nd season in the NFL out of West Virginia, who I really liked coming out, both those guys are going to give Patrick McCarry and Ezra Cleveland runs for their money. And to me, both starting offensive guard spots are ones to watch. Now, Robert Hainsey and Patrick McCarry, both their contracts were restructured this offseason, so I'm not saying that Jaguars are going to, pivot off of them anytime soon by any means. And as for Cleveland, we've talked about it. I thought he was the 3rd best offensive lineman for Jacksonville last year. So could the Jaguars just simply be looking to try to inject some youth on the interior kind of guard spots? Maybe. And there is a world where the Jaguars look to pivot off of Ezra Cleveland before the 2027 season. That being said, if Pregnon or Milam have a really good offseason program, they get to it, there is a world where they both could be starting. So it's going to be very interesting to see. That's going to be one of the bigger training camp battles that I'm going to be locked in on. But I want to ask you guys, pick 2 of these names to start. You can type EC and or PM if you think it's Ezra Cleveland and Patrick McCarry, or if you think it's a mix of veterans and rookies, or I guess younger guys should say. You can also type WM for Wyatt Milam, EP for Emmanuel Pregnon. I want you to type 2 of these names in terms of who you think are going to be the 2 starting guards for Jacksonville this upcoming year. Going to the defensive line now, transition to the defensive side of the football. And, the Jaguars added some much-needed depth on the defensive line. The top 4 remains the same, and Josh Hines-Allen, Eric Armstead, Von Hamilton, and Trayvon Walker, who we'll get to in a minute. But adding Wesley Williams, Ruka Roro, and Albert Regis, to me, gives this group a much-needed boost at depth that they did not have last season, and therefore I have much more confidence in this group's production. And Trayvon Walker is obviously going to be a big part of that. He didn't have the greatest year statistically last year. They moved him a lot into a bunch of different positions, but they still loved enough of him to kind of reward him for his play during his NFL career. And I do think that given the new depth that's behind Jacksonville, behind Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, to me is going to be beneficial for both Hines-Allen and Walker in terms of just keeping them fresh, getting into the later parts of the season where you're hopefully competing not only just to win the division, but maybe a higher seed in the AFC. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars approach, the edge/defensive tackle position in a really smart way, and I think Walker is going to be a huge beneficiary of that. Moving into linebacker now, where I'm not sure I am the most confident in this room. You obviously lost Devin Lloyd in free agency to the Carolina Panthers. Foye Oluokun, he's not getting any younger, although he's still a really talented player, still could rack up a lot of tackles, Dennis Gardex, your typical, hey, you want him to kind of go forward, not backwards. You're just going to be more in pass rush sets. And then Ventrell Miller and Jack Kaiser, who we talked a little bit on yesterday's show. These are the Jaguars' kind of main investments in terms of potentially replacing Devin Lloyd. And right now, while I think the inside track does go to Ventrell Miller, I could easily see Jack Kaiser, who was one of the first draft picks of this Jaguars regime, potentially getting some looks at potentially being a starting linebacker alongside Foye Oluokun That being said, this is the room I'm least confident in. I'm not sure exactly what the Jaguars' plan was, other than, hey, we just have to get cheaper at this position. We cannot afford to pay Devin Lloyd. That's one position in the draft where I would have really liked Jacksonville to at least make some investment, at least not until the seventh round, but we'll ultimately see how it works out. Moving to cornerback now, where, man, the myth, the legend, Travis Hunter is set to be this team's cornerback one going into next year. You re-signed Monteric Brown right before the start of free agency. He's going to be their other outside guy alongside Jordan Lewis there at the nickel spot. You obviously bring back Jarian Jones as well. There's a lot of potential in this room. And the big talking point really around this whole team is Travis Hunter. He obviously moved up in the first round, not this past draft, but the draft before, to go get him at number 2 overall. What's his role going to be? He's recovering from a torn LCL. I'd expect him to eventually, make it back into offseason programming to get more acclimated at the cornerback spot. You'll still see him on offense, but that being said, I think the Jaguars' best course of action and what is going to happen is he's going to be this team's number 1 corner that's going to be a set lockdown for Jacksonville against opposing offenses. Getting to the safety room now, where we've got, Eric Murray kind of stepping up for, obviously, I'm blanking on the Cardinals safety that left in free agency alongside Antonio Johnson. Jalen Husky could be the heir apparent to Eric Murray, who's on an expiring contract, but Caleb Ransall could also mix it in as well. But when you look at this Jaguars defensive back room as a whole, to me, there's a lot of playmakers back there. Antonio Johnson really had a breakout season. Monteric Brown, 7th rounder that really proved himself. Travis Hunter, hopefully he stays healthy, knock on wood, and Jordan Lewis as well. So, long story short, regardless of what they do at that other free safety spot, because I do think there's going to be competition alongside Antonio Johnson, I'm really excited to see the secondary in 2026. I think this was a group that wasn't necessarily talked about the most, but they were number 2 in takeaways last year. It was a big part of the secondary's play last season. Andrew Wingard was the safety I was thinking about. I couldn't remember. So, either way, the secondary, I think, has the potential to be one of the better secondaries in the National Football League, and I cannot wait to see this group in action, especially with Travis Hunter now in the fold. Moving on to the special teams depth chart to kind of round things out here. Cam Little, obviously one of the best kickers in the game. You guys already know. Logan Cook, Ross Mastick, round out your kind of punter and long snapper positions. I've got Bashal Tutin and Parker Washington as your starting kick returner and punt returner. Those roles could obviously change, especially with Bashal Tutin's expected increase on offense. And if Parker Washington is this team's wide receiver one, do they necessarily want him on punt return? We'll ultimately wait and see how Coen handles it from a coaching perspective. You guys let me know, though. What grade would you give this Jaguars roster post-draft, post-free agency? Scale it for me 0 to 100. 0, this is the worst roster you've ever seen. Why would anybody trot this team out there? 100, it's goated. It's one of the best teams of all time. Let me know down in the comments section. To me, being fair and honest here, I'll give it an 83. There's not a lot of high-end names in terms of like elite talent, but there's a lot of really solid groups on this team. And I don't think that people are kind of estimating that there's rumors out there that Jaguars could take a step back after a 13-win season last year. To me, I don't see it. To me, there's a lot of things that are still in place from a talent perspective, not just to mention a coaching perspective, that there's to like about Jacksonville. And I think if Trevor Lawrence can continue to build off that second half of the season, where he was one of the best quarterbacks in all of football, you surround him now with Bashal Tutin, Chris Rodriguez, a really solid 1-2 punch, an underrated 1-2 punch. The offense continues to thrive. You figure out, who's your kind of lead targets for him. Defense, again, if the linebacker position could just at least maintain, I think the Jaguars have a really good chance to be one of the better defenses of all football. But ultimately, we'll wait and see. My grade is an 83. That'll be it for this episode of Jags Now, presented by Chat Sports. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time, we'll be covering the Jacksonville Jaguars all offseason long. So make sure you subscribe, turn on your notifications, because you're never going to miss out. As always, Jags fans, peace out.